Hi, everybody. We're off to a slow start today. You're watching Dutch.
I'm Jamie. This is Hob, and you're watching Dutch and Dragons.
Can we try this again? I'm Hob.
I'm Jamie.
And you're watching
Dutch and Dragons.
All right, now that we've gotten that screw up out of the way.
He really does need the Dutch. He needs the coffee.
Yes, I needs the coffee. This week we are talking about
travel, the good, the bad. Do we really gotta?
I think we said let's just skip it.
Skip it, yeah.
So travel in Dungeons and Dragons,
or
and the difficulties of traveling in Dungeons and Dragons. Wow, I'm on a roll
you are
today.
On a roll today.
So there's a question on there,
which is, what game-specific purpose does travel serve anyhow?
All right, so way back in the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, there was a reason it was called Dungeons and Dragons. You literally played in a dungeon and fought dragons. Not necessarily entirely in dungeons, but predominantly your party would be in an area, there would be a dungeon, and your whole purpose was to explore that dungeon, gain treasure, amass wealth, and kill everything inside.
Slay the dragon.
Huzzah! And often slaying the dragon was a part of that process. In more modern Dungeons and Dragons games and other role-playing games, you have travel between locations because your locations are more part of a living and existing world. Right. At least that's the idea.
Things have gotten bigger.
Things have gotten bigger. It's not just mega dungeons anymore. It is a whole world of things to do. So travel serves a couple of purposes. One, it allows your players to interact with the world in a non-combat capacity. It allows them to feel scale.
With each other.
It allows them to interact with each other. It also allows them to participate in downtime activities such as camping. And in the world, and that has its own role-playing camping, and it all has sort of a purpose. But is it absolutely necessary? No. That's the short answer.
I think that's actually one of these questions in here. So
it is probably one of those questions.
Yeah.
So, question number one.
What are some good ways to introduce travel in my game?
Good ways to introduce or include travel in your game. When it is necessary for the players to go from point A to point B and the distance is significant. Yep. Which is to say, it's not going to take them a couple of hours to walk there, but we're talking about several days. That is the way that you would do it. Now, generally speaking, there are a couple of ways that you can handle that travel component, and there are a lot of ways that it can drag things down, but that's another question.
Next question. How do I introduce random encounter mechanics without travel? You know what? This all sort of hinges together, doesn't it?
A lot of it does kind of hinge together. So random encounter mechanics is generally while traveling you will have random encounters. Other travelers on the road, monsters, brigands, events, locations, red lights, green lights, bad drivers, wagons on their sides. I mean, it's just a mess out there. But anyhow, so
honestly, if you've read any of these epic fantasy tales, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, the quintessential Lord of the Rings, I mean, they travel a lot.
Yeah.
But you don't ever see the travel.
Sometimes it's really, really boring.
And sometimes it's exciting.
But most of the time, you skip to the important parts. And that's really sort of what you do is if you have encounters, don't work with random encounters. And there's more about that that we could say, but let's go to the next question.
I really hate travel. Do I have to include it in my game? No, absolutely not.
And there's that question, by the way. No.
Yeah, no.
So go ahead.
One of the things you can do, you can get around travel. I'm a huge fan of fast travel mechanics. I usually include some mode of transportation in my game that speeds it up. And on my current game, I'm taking my players through a campaign that is placed in around Pleasant Land. By Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Excellent book. If you haven't added it to your collection, I would highly recommend it. But I basically went all Netflix's 7 Deadly Sins on them and gave them a house that sits on the top of a giant grub that moves them around the world. So they have a little grub house. It serves 2 purposes for me. One, it gives them a home base. Someplace my players can return to, store stuff, feel like they have a connection to. And 2, it lets me avoid painful travel, is the way that I put it. The grub can't go everywhere, so he stops at the edge of forests and rivers and lakes, and he will stop at interesting things and go, oh my goodness, there's a tower in the way, do you want to look at it? So I keep those aspects of random encounters and exploration in the game, but without the you're traveling due west for 2 days. Congratulations, your feet hurt. You know.
So, and I've tried a lot of different random encounter mechanics that have almost invariably fallen flat on their faces, from tables to predetermined random encounters with tables to fully randomized tables full of different numbers. I've tried D20s, I've tried D6s, I've tried D100s, I've tried all of this stuff, and honestly, just ditch the random encounter in its entirety. Make every encounter count towards something important in the game.
Is there anything I can do to make my travel more interesting?
Absolutely. Skip the boring parts.
Yep. Skip the boring parts.
Honestly, travel is a very boring experience in most cases. The large part of travel is just sitting around getting to where you're going.
I mean, there's a reason why we have iPods and Netflix to download on plane travels and audiobooks and all of this crap. It's because travel is kind of boring, unless your players are making it fun.
Right, and in which case then, fully and completely, I encourage leaving it in. But travel is very much a downtime activity, and that is something to take into consideration when you are crafting your game and your sessions, because travel is something that is so boring. Your players have to take that opportunity to utilize that time to make it interesting.
One of the things you can do is put stuff out there for them to find. We're going to grab our coffee. Hold on, guys. And now that we are parked,
have our coffee.
Put stuff in them to find, because traveling really should be a way to view the world and a way to view the cultures. One of my favorite things to do. Again, looking back on things like Lord of the Rings, they found the statues of the trolls. There are old temples to find. There's old civilizations that have come and gone, and
you can pile your history into the world through travel. You can leave marks of prior civilizations. You can leave marks of prior adventures. And not every ruin has to be a place to explore. Sometimes ruins are just ruins. There's nothing of value in them. They're in great disrepair, they're fallen, they're so long disused that they are of no value to anyone except as a spot to provide a little bit of shelter as the wind blows by.
But you will be surprised at what your characters gravitate to. I had one game where they came across these ruins and they were like, we love these ruins, we're going to fix them up! And they did, and they created a base. And I was like, alright, well then, that happened.
So there's a lot of things that you can do to spice up travel.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about, right?
Yeah, that was what we were talking about.
Good.
Ready for the next question?
Yes.
Does every random encounter while traveling need to be combat-based?
No, actually I would recommend that most random encounters in travel not be combat-based. And the reason being is because, unless this is what your players really, really love, and then by all means, with my blessings, go forward.
Let them murder hobo.
But the reason is because for the most part, combat encounters should be planned and somewhat scripted into your game, which means that they should have a purpose. Now, in some cases, the purpose is that somebody is trying to rob your player characters, and that's a really bad idea most of the time.
But it does happen.
And that's okay. Include that in the world, but plan them, don't randomize them.
And also think about where they're traveling. If you've got a group that's traveling across a I'm beeping, a war-torn area, maybe part of this whole travel experience is getting to know Camp A and Camp B. I mean, they're a neutral party, but they could always be trying to get recruited.
And you also have to consider in well-controlled lands. Is there a regular military that patrols the area, or a regular militia that patrols the area? Are they in lands that are fraught with monster attacks? Because if they are supposed to be in lands that are fraught full of monsters,
they're gonna run into monsters.
You better have some monsters for them to run into.
If you're in Australia, where everything is trying to kill you,
then you should try and kill it right back.
Right.
But the idea is that encounters in your world should not be purposeless and entirely random. Now, you can add encounters that appear to be random events, but you should have them planned, and you should have some idea of what their purpose is. I had what appeared to be a random travel encounter for one of my games that was an entirely planned event, and it was another supposed adventurer and treasure seeker who was interested in trading stories with the rest of the party and sharing their fire and their food, and his purpose was to give them a clue about where they needed to go. And that worked. It worked perfectly, in fact.
This reminds me of I think it was Bruce had a campaign going where they came across a random, sort of like they thought it was a random encounter on their way to a village, and they ended up murder hoboing the entire group. And they get to the village and they find out basically that they had just killed Robin Hood and his merry men. Oops.
So not every encounter has to be combat based, and if your players are prone to murder hoboing, then
keep that in mind.
Keep that in mind. That if you place a random encounter in their path that looks like it might supposedly be a combat encounter, they might engage it as such. So there you go.
Ooh, I'm ripping the questions up, baby.
Tearing through.
Can I run a hex crawl without getting mired in travel? Ooh.
Yes, but it's hard.
It's hard. Yeah, it is.
It's really, really hard. Mainly because the point of a hex crawl is to travel. And so
this is not our favorite style
and
game.
To explore, and it suffers a great deal because from getting mired in travel. Now, there are mistakes that I've made in running hex crawls, not having a clearly defined destination for them to reach along the way. Poor directions, which is to say that I gave them in-world directions, which they interpreted horribly.
Very bad. We did not take his directions well.
They didn't.
We got lost.
I mean,
we got hella lost.
Oh man!
We were so far afield.
I thought the directions were very, very clear, but apparently they were as clear as mud. To use I'm out of the words. But anyhow, yeah. So hex crawls can get very mired in the travel. They can get very bogged down. There are ways that you can avoid that. Take into consideration that every hex should have something of interest in it, even if it's not necessarily a dungeon. There should be something in every hex. Don't rely on random encounters. Again, do not rely on random encounters. It will bite you in your ass every single time. And there's my advice on hex crawls.
What are some bad ways to include travel in my game?
Well, hex crawls, where you rely on random encounter tables, is a way to poorly include travel in your game. Requiring constant checks, skill checks, perception checks. Checks. I've done this.
Check.
It's always boring. It's never exciting. And then when something does happen, it falls flat because nobody cares because you've been making them check for it the whole fucking time. Pardon my language.
I made the mistake of during one of my first campaigns making them travel, like, congratulations, you went 25 miles and nothing interesting has happened at all. And, like, role-playing out, it was painful, it was long, it was awful. It was just awful. So by the time my party got to where they're going, they were so over the whole game and the whole campaign because it had just been this really dull slog.
Yep.
That by the time the action happened, they were like, okay, yay, we beat the thing, and we're so over it.
Yeah, it was sort of a yay type of situation.
Think of it like you know those slow burn movies. There's a good slow burn movie, and then there's one where you're like, okay, get to the effing point already. I mean, we've been watching this damn thing for an hour, and literally nothing exciting or interesting, I don't give a crap about these characters, has happened.
I'm going to harp on this throughout this whole conversation. Everything, literally everything that you do in your game should have a point and a purpose.
Yep.
You should never drag your story or your players down into the weeds of anything unless they're supposed to be crawling through the weeds literally to look for something.
Now, there are games out there, like, again, we're going to go back to some of my favorite, like, augments, like Vein of the Earth.
Oh, Veins of the Earth.
The whole point of Veins of the Earth is this awesome exploration down into the deep, dark places where light and it's got this very,
this is more Lamentations of the Flame Princess content, by the way.
In the caves kind of crap than anything else. And it is great. It's fantastic.
It's a fantastic book. If you can find it in hard copy, I strongly suggest getting it. It's a beautiful book. It's very much designed to be a collectible item. You can get PDFs for it off of, I think, DM's Guild or Drive-Thru RPG, and well worth the investment. Absolutely 100%.
And it's eerie, and it's hard, and it's cool, and
it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous to your party.
And it's so much fun, and that sort of travel is a lot of fun. And those are the sorts of things that you kind of want to mimic in day-to-day travel.
Right.
But you don't want to just be like, and you've gone 25 miles. Yay.
Right.
Like, yeah, the travel itself should be part of...
Yeah, it should serve a purpose, and it should be a part of the experience.
Just travel, always drag the game down. Why or why not? Not always, like we were just discussing, if the travel itself is... Purposeful.
I think really the key component to travel is that it should be purposeful. It shouldn't just be something that is done because it's done. If they're going from point A to point B and there is no encounter intended, there's no purpose to an encounter between point A and point B, just fast forward it. Be like, congratulations, it took you 5 days, you mark it off on whatever you're using for time tracking, and you've arrived at the village unscathed. Congratulations.
Basically, I mean, you don't have to go through it. Here's a good one. Last question. What are some travel encounters you've used to increase the fun?
The one that stands out the most is the one where they ran into another adventurer while they were camped. Who was literally there to provide them with stories and legends and a clue for something to get to. There have been a couple of times when travel has actually been a key component of the adventure, where they needed to go from one location to another, but they needed to do it in a stealthy and secretive fashion. This wasn't in a game that we've played. This was a completely different game that was run by somebody else. But the game required that travel, and it was required in a way that made it fun and exciting. And I don't know how else to explain it.
I like to say, go back to your favorite fantasy books and movies, and there's a couple of themes you'll notice about travel when you get into those. And those are, one, you're being harried. You are being chased And the part of the travel
that one
is
was
to
fun.
act out the chase.
Yep.
So the travel is, it's not just travel, it's run away. The second thing is that...
It's your classical chase scene.
Yeah, it's your classical chase scene. So chase scenes, I think, should be played out. 2, their travel, you're putting them on a road with very specific idea of putting something in their path.
Mm-hmm.
Like a building, an NPC, some
ruin,
sort of ruin, a secret
exploration
sword.
opportunity.
Yeah, something that they're going to find in the world that's going to be relevant and helpful to them. Or 3, it's a history lesson.
Yep.
You're stopping because there's a piece of history about the world, within the world, that is going to be useful, helpful, or interesting to your party. And I really think that I stick to those 3 things when I'm talking about traveling. And making traveling interesting and making traveling not a painful part.
Right. And again, just stick to travel should always serve a purpose. Mm-hmm. There should always be a purpose to any encounters that happen during travel. Sometimes it's okay to role play out camping if you and travel if you have players that can make it interesting for themselves. If you don't have those types of players, you're better off skipping it.
There are lots of players who will use travel, and they will use that downtime, they will use that camping time to talk to each other and get to know each other and their characters and their backgrounds, and they're really into the role playing. And those type of characters, I will give them good travel time because they do a majority of their role playing during travel.
Yeah.
And then I have groups that just go, okay, we're traveling.
Yeah.
What order are we traveling in? Oh, the barbarian goes first. Cool.
Yep.
I'm like, that's about as far as you get with traveling. And for those people, I don't make them travel much.
So that's all we have time for today. We thank you very much for joining us.
Yep.
And if you have questions, comments, please leave them in the box down there somewhere.
I even think talking about traveling is a little boring.
Yeah,
but
talking about traveling
it's
is
a little boring.
We tried.
We tried, guys. Sorry.
So we hope it wasn't too boring for you. If you like what we're doing, if you enjoy these question and answer sessions, please comment, subscribe below. If you don't like them, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll be more than happy to let you hate watch us all you want. If you have suggestions, questions, comments, we've already done this. Anyhow, next week's topic is...
Ring the bell, subscribe, and so you can tune in next week to talk about magic.
So there you go. We'll be talking about magic.
And the magic systems.
How fun is that?
Woohoo!
Thank you again, everybody. Have a fantastic, wonderful rest of your day.
Yep, bye!